This is our first podcast of TFC 2021. The response to both of our virtual TFCs last December and this December, we wondered if anybody would sign up because everybody's kind of zoomed out right now. They're just tired of video. But the response was just really good again. I think during the holidays, it's, people were kind of low on money, so it's hard to fly somewhere and get hotel rooms and all that kind of stuff. So it's been a real success again. And we have probably, 20 of the most diverse people from all fields. And I think that's how we learn. I think too often track coaches hang with track coaches and weight room people hang out in weight rooms with weight room people and all that kind of stuff. And what we need is more cross-pollination and getting out of our comfort zone. And Ernie, I watched your presentation today, and I couldn't take notes fast enough. And last year, honestly, God, not one single presentation did I watch twice, but I will watch this a second time because I just couldn't write down my notes fast enough.
That's great.
I had to get through it to do this podcast. So first of all, tell me about you as an athlete.
Yeah, sure. I was a high school three sport athlete. So I think one of the positives that I had coming out of my entire athlete experience is that I did cross country, but I wanted to do football. I played basketball, and I went from being really bad to a starting 5 guy over the course of 4 years. A guy that barely made the team to being a good player on one of the best teams in school history. And then I was a track guy, which that came a little bit more natural for me. The dream was to become a college basketball guy, like almost any male in the state of Indiana.
What school did you go to in Indiana?
I went to a little school called John Glenn High School in northern Indiana near South Bend, kind of near Notre Dame. But that's where I grew up. And I kind of bounced around between my parents separating. And so I had some really, in what I would call really good, diverse experience as well. I ended up going to a high school of 400 kids, but I went to a middle school that had 1,400 kids in Elkhart, Indiana. So you can imagine the difference of those experiences, but they were both really beneficial to me in my life, both as an athlete and as a person now as a coach. But then I went on, and I was okay in track. I was 38.90 in the 300 hurdles. So I didn't do anything that was, oh my God, in high school, but I got enough to have a shot to run in college. So I had a few opportunities. One was a really tiny school. I don't even know what division they are. One was to walk on at Indiana State University. And then one was on the smallest scholarship possible at the University of Indianapolis. And that's what I did. I went there on a small scholarship along with some art scholarships, actually, because I was an art student as well. And I worked my way into being one of the best sprinter hurdlers on the team and was a national qualifier in the 400 hurdles, but I got to run the 200, the 400, the 400 hurdles, the 110 highs, the 4x1, the 4x4. I did all those things. So that's been beneficial in my coaching career. And if you want to throw back a little bit, I ran everything from the 100 to cross country in high school. So just a lot of different experiences. And I had as high as the 8th fastest time in the country in D2 in the 400 hurdles, back in the day.
So when was the tipping point where you knew that you were going to be a coach?
Oh, that's easy. I decided on my profession as a high school teacher and high school coach at the age of 16. So I knew in my junior year of high school that I wanted to be a high school coach, and it was pretty simple. It's kind of funny how things work out, but I enjoyed the fact that some of my coaches were changing my life. And I also thought I could be a better teacher than some of my teachers. That was the bottom line. And then my art teacher,
low bar there, right?
My art teacher got in my ear about, man, you're a good artist. you know, your academic piece, it's not great, but you need to keep improving. And I think you can. You've got this athletic side and all sorts of different sports, and you're just a really good, he called it a cheerleader at the time. You're really good at like just motivating people and making them feel like they can keep doing more. I don't even know what he's talking about, but that's what he said. He said, so if you would go into this career of teaching and coaching, you're going to get the summers off and you're going to get to be at school, and you kind of like high school, which the truth was I couldn't stand high school, but it made me think. And nobody in my family, extended family, cousins, grandparents, aunts, uncles, nobody had ever graduated college. And a great majority of them had never graduated high school. So as I looked at some of my family, I didn't have I didn't look down on any of their careers, but I knew what it was like for some of my uncles and my father to work at some of these jobs as they were getting older. It was just hard on them.
Yep.
So I just started thinking about that piece. And that's what really, that's that whole thing between the ages of 16 and 17 put me on a path to become as good as I could as an actual art teacher and a coach. And I never looked back from that point on.
You know, I love what you said, that teacher that took enough interest in you to encourage you and suggest. And I think about how, I don't know, maybe 80% of all high school kids never experience that.
Yeah.
Not one time does a caring adult talk to him about his future. And I think in coaching, it's fairly common that we have those relationships with kids, which,
agreed.
I mean, no matter how good of a chemistry teacher I was, I never had the relationships with my chemistry students as
Absolutely
I do with my athletes. And I think even then we squander our wealth, you know, that we don't realize how important it is that we sit and talk to a kid about those things. So that's heartwarming. And so you did become a high school teacher first?
Yeah, absolutely. I was a high school teacher for 14 years.
Good God. How old are you?
I'm 42.
Okay. I kind of picture you being like 28 or something.
No, 42 years old.
14 years. Were you an art teacher?
I was an art teacher. I started in the basic like drawing, painting, you know, basic art classes. And then I transitioned into teaching some photography as well, which was an interest of mine in high school. Another one of those art teachers that had an impact on me. And then I got to live through that transition to film photography and video, transitioning to all digital. And then I built up one of the biggest, most successful digital photography programs in high schools in the nation. So that's essentially what I was doing in the classroom for the last 6 or 7 years of my career. I was teaching on IMAX and Photoshop, and my kids were winning incredible things while I was helping people get better in track. And I took a lot of pride in helping a lot of different people find a path other than the sciences or mathematics, or because that was me. Like I wouldn't be here with you right now without things other than the typical subjects.
Right. So how is your life vastly different now that you're at San Jose State University in California rather than Northern Indiana and not teaching?
So I always envisioned myself as a young person going out and trying to do big things and being willing to take risks. And, you know, I was in Indiana for a long time. You know, I went to college in Indianapolis. Then I worked in Monrovia High School near Indianapolis for some years, then Bloomington High School North in Bloomington, Indiana for several years. And I took a big risk going out to Ashland University in Ohio. And the reason it was a big risk for me is because I wanted to become a college coach. But if you don't know that world, nobody wants to hire you if you've never been a college coach.
For sure.
So I fought this thing of, well, we can't hire you because you don't have experience. We want to hire you, but we can't because you don't have experience. So really what happened was I kept teaching, but I started volunteering at Indiana University. The only job offer I had out of, I would say, at least I don't know, 30, at least 30 over a span of 2 or 3 years was Ashland University. And it was only like $32,000, which I was making 61,000, 62,000 as a teacher at the time.
Right.
That was a big risk for me, but I knew that I did everything that I wanted to as a high school teacher and coach. And the only reason to stay was to stay in my comfort zone. And I talk to kids all the time about getting out of their comfort zone and following their dreams and all this stuff. I preached for years. So I decided to take that job, and that went really well.
I'd say so.
If you follow me at all, you know that that's gone extremely well. National champions, national record holders, guy in the USA Olympics. I've had a 400 runner or a 400 hurdler in the Olympic trials or USA championships for six years in a row. So all that's gone really well. And that led to this opportunity. And the difference is I'm in a different place in the United States. Coaching athletes is still the same. Every place has its own little challenges, but they all have these, in my opinion, if you look at things the right way, these super really good upsides or positives. And this place has a lot of them.
And it's still a risky move for you because you have a young family, right?
Yeah. So I actually have a mix. I've got a 20-year-old, a guy that's about 17, a 16-year-old right now. And then I have a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old. So, it's hard stepping away from the older ones. So that's hard. That's risky. And luckily they've been very supportive of all of it. And, we stay in good touch and we're very close. But then to bring out the wife and the young ones here is, yeah, definitely it's a hard thing. But my wife's understanding of risk taking and building and, really where we want to be as a family and where I want to be as a professional was not in Ashland, Ohio. And that's not a knock on Ashland, Ohio, by the way. That's not where we envision like our long-term goal.
So obviously people can watch your presentation. And like I said, I'm going to watch it twice. And I mean, I'm going to steal a shit ton of stuff from you. I feel like, I put out a course on starts and stuff, and I'm like, God, I wish I would have watched this before I would have put out that course. If you were, this is hard to believe, but there are sprint coaches at the high school level who are terrified of teaching the blocks.
Sure.
Track can be, you go to a clinic and you see some uppity college coach, no offense, complexify everything.
Right.
And it leaves you walking out of that presentation like, God, I got to find somebody to coach the blocks.
Yeah. And we're just not coaching.
Or just not coach him. Yeah. So if you were talking to a guy, give me those handful of things that you've got to do and try to make me feel better as a guy who has never coached blocks.
Yeah. So I think, since I did coach high school for that long and I coached club kids, which by the way, those club kids were anywhere from, starting with my youngest, probably went to some of my camps in clubs when he was 6 years old. So I was coaching kids from 6 years old to 18 years old. I didn't have a choice but to simplify things, and I wanted to do a good job with people of all levels. So I tend to simplify things because I think people overcomplicate things. And I think the problem is you can complicate things and get into some, crazy terms, technology, science at upper levels. But when we're talking to 6-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, and 14-year-olds, and some of these 18 and 17-year-olds, they ain't much more developed than like a well-developed 12 or 14-year-old. So
sometimes my fastest kid is a kid that's never been to a track meet.
Correct. Exactly. So I want to keep things really simple from the get-go. So one of the things that I paid attention to early on that I didn't think that I had a great concept on was just setting the blocks in position and set, which is why I have that in the video. And, you know, some people are like, you have to measure and do this and measure the tibia, and you got to do this, and you're going to take a tape measure, and you're going to measure from their knee to their, whoa, no, we're not. One, I ain't got time. Two, there's no way for me to teach my staff that and every kid that in a program. So I've simplified things a lot in the video to show, do this, do this, do this. When they're in set, look like this. So that's one component. And then in terms of, you know, I had mentioned in the video in terms of reaction time, I noticed that while my people were getting pretty good, when we went to more national caliber meets, my people were getting smoked just on reaction. They might run exactly the same speed, but might get blown away out of the blocks by literally 0.2 or 0.18. So, you know, in a 60 dash at a national caliber meet, we're done. So I started to implement just some reactive things that were not complicated, simple, but I think they were useful. And sometimes they're not even useful right away, but they are in time. And that's something that I think is important too. Coming through the sprint world, you always hear everybody screaming, push, 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 push. I just think that is almost too simplified and overused. And I think there are a little bit more cues to, like, patient pushes, finishing through the glute, getting the long extension of the back leg, the knee drive, what it should look like, parallel shins coming out of the blocks, where should the foot strike? And all that stuff is really easy to show in a video of a kid to a whole classroom, maybe your whole team, but it'll make sense to them as well without overcomplicating it. And I feel like there's so much on the video. I don't even know how to condense it into important things.
I'll bring up a couple things. First of all, I love your 2 foot, 3 foot thing, because that's exactly what I teach. And I think that if you get that right, it's kind of like what you were saying. A lot of things kind of flow from that.
Yeah,
you know,
it's going to get you close enough where you can start to work in a correct way.
Yeah, and you know, in the Olympics, I saw Bolt stepping off 2 foot, 3 foot.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I mean, he's stepping off. I mean, it was 2 feet, toe on the pedal, 2 feet, toe on the pedal, or 3 feet, toe on the pedal. And that's what he used.
That's it. Right.
And it's like, wait, he's really tall, but tall people have bigger feet. So it all works out pretty good.
It all works out.
One of the things that I really loved was your statement about, you showed a picture that looked damn good, but both feet were on the ground at the same time.
Yeah. So there's something I think that we can always talk about the high school level. And I think this is actually really important for football coaches. And keep in mind that I was the speed and development coach for the Bloomington High School North football program for years. So this is not just coming from a track coach, like peeking over at the football crew. This is me working with them. There's a tendency just for us to say, stay down, stay low. And what ends up happening is that they just all run bent over. They never get in good positions. They just have quick feet constantly on the ground. But if you start to slow down videos, they essentially almost have 2 feet on the ground at once. And I always say, you know, we call that, right? And some people are like, slow. And I'm like, no, that's called standing. Like 2 feet on the ground is standing. You ain't going anywhere. And we got to create some space under the ground to be able to strike the ground. And able to make that happen, you have to have some flight time or projection. So as much as kids want to stand up, it's also important not to just have them run like this. And that's one of the harder concepts, I think, to get coaches to understand, and kids, not just one or the other.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I tell my athletes, the number one cue that coaches use coming out of the blocks is stay low. And it's the worst cue. It's not the dumbest, worst thing you can say. I actually saw a head coach before a meet working with a kid, and they had some like cane pole or something, and the kid had to stay under. Yeah. And of course they're always artificially bent, you know, but you showed a thing that I had a big impact on me. You know, a very good starter, very good shape, but he stabbed his front foot into the ground.
Correct.
And then you showed you showed the foot with
Off the
space
ground. Mhm.
off the ground with
Yeah.
space that, so if you stab your foot into the ground, all you can do is roll off of it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have space, you get to hammer back
Get to
behind
strike.
you.
Mhm.
And I thought, too many times we're so interested in shape that maybe we miss those things.
Thanks, Coach. Yeah. So, and with that, the low comment is it has good intention, because so many people want to stand up and run. But what I think we forget about is positions. And so when I think about it, and this is what's interesting about this conversation. When I coached high school kids, of course I had to address this a little bit. As a college coach, this is the number one thing that I actually have to address. All the athletes want to start just pretty much running bent over. And I have to, it's so weird, because now they've always been hammered with stay low, stay low. I have to literally tell them, come up. You're going to have, starting is out and up, or up and out is actually what I say. Your chest has to come up. You have to shoot this way.
That's what I say. I say
effective.
up and out. I think that's your cue too. Up and out.
Now it only is for some of them, but for the kids that want to run, hunched over and bent over, you have to figure out always, and I always say this, you have to figure out what cues work for kids. And I coached and taught a lot more in big groups and a little bit more generic at the high school level, because sometimes I was working with 30 to 60 sprinters. At the collegiate level, I get to pick and choose a little bit of what's work. I have a basic things that I say to my group, but then for certain ones, like they're always hunched down, shoulders down, chin down, I need them to get here and finish through their push, have space for their knee drive, and project up and out a little bit. So I am going to cue up and out to that kid, that guy. Have to.
I love your wealth of experience with things that kids do wrong.
Yeah.
And I had a hurdler that really could have, should have been top 5 in the state, and he ended up. This thing actually came back to bite him, and what it was he had been told that if you roll your shoulders forward a little bit, then you're kind of cheating the system a little bit. Yep. And that's what the big timers do. And you made it very clear that there might be some freaks who can do that.
Yes.
But we don't want to copy freaks.
Nope. That's the wrong path to follow. The head coach that I work with right now, Charles Ryan, calls certain people unicorns. And if you're only going to follow the unicorns, you're going to get yourself in trouble, because if you ain't a unicorn, it's probably not going to work. And that is one of those things, I think.
And the toe drag.
The toe drag, is absolutely another thing. And even that, it's just supposed to be a cue to help you do something that is more efficient or correct. But, the shoulders over only makes weak, non-explosive people start slower and in worse positions. So, I found myself, even at the collegiate level, more than I expected, having to get some of my weaker guys, or get some of my women in particular, to actually bring their shoulders back, either right above their hands or even an inch back, to take a little pressure off their hands so they could actually move them on sound, so that they're not attached to the ground and stuck. Heavy. Yeah. And because 9 times out of 10, if you watch the video in slow-mo, their hips start to go and their legs are pushing, but their fingers are stuck to the ground, which is not going to do us any good.
And well, that reminds me of when Marcellus Moore ran his second race of his life. He ran against the fastest guy in Illinois. And I take pictures at meets because I love photography, and I try not to coach my kids at meets. And the kid that he was running against was flat-handed. Okay. And his coach is a great coach. I guarantee that coach to this day does not know that kid was doing that. But yet my picture picked it up. And I don't even think that you mentioned that, because being flat-handed is almost something you never see. Let alone with somebody that runs a 10.48.
Right. Agreed.
So yeah, all those things are so much fun. Another thing I loved was, I pretty much ignore people when they start talking about degrees of the
Yeah.
front, and because I believe it's a complexifier. It confuses me. It makes me feel like I'm not smart enough, all that kind of stuff. But you were talking about how, you know, the back knee has to be over 90 degrees. And I think the front has to be over 105, something like that.
I think in that video, and I don't get tied to those numbers either. And which is, I put them in there for the people that like the numbers. I think I said 115 to 130, if I remember right.
Got it.
But it doesn't matter. For me, people give exact numbers. I say it's a range.
Yes.
My big thing is this. I want the back leg femur to be at least straight up and down from the hip to the knee, or slightly tilted back. That's it.
Yep. So that's what you look for.
Then that angle will open up to where it needs to be. If I've set the
you don't get your
right,
protractor out of the knee.
I don't get my protractor at all. But I do pay attention to that femur from the hip to the knee. I pay attention to, because to me that's important. You know, if that angle starts to get too little, it's not going to be explosive and powerful and fast. But if I get that knee to here or even slightly bigger, especially for my long people, then I find that leg is going to be explosive, because it can extend and pulse a little bit, put some force off the back pedal, and knee punch out.
And then the story that you told, I totally could relate to, when you compare a full squat, a real deep squat,
right,
to like a quarter squat or a box squat. We are so much stronger at the top of our squat,
absolutely,
than at the bottom. And as you said, we are so much faster moving that weight. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what a great story to tell kids who have been told by their AAU coach that they want a bunch start because they heard that from somebody. That when you get overly bunched, you are weak and slow.
Yes, absolutely. Or even if you want to say you're strong, you're still going to be slow. You know, you're still going to be slow. But yeah, you're essentially stronger and more explosive in those positions and open angles.
Before we move on to the hurdles and the 400, there was a couple things. I loved your hill stuff. I love the fact that you're not running up mountains, and you're only going 10 meters. And
that blows people's minds.
I just love that. And then I also love your, I mean, I've always felt inadequate because I don't get the sleds out. I don't have sleds to get out. Because, you know, but if I did, I would still probably not get them out, because it's a pain in the ass. And you just made me feel so much better that when you have a group of 40 sprinters, a sled workout is pretty weird. You have to have a lot of sleds and a lot of space and blah, blah, blah. And you've found a way around that stuff that I'm always looking to do. And that's your partner resisted stuff. Yeah. And then the third thing was the stuff with the bands. And you can talk about all three of these things, but I've got to learn this. What exactly are the bands? Where do you get them and how much they cost?
So I may have to look that up. I really think those were called, like, I think there was something weird, like just oversized bands or really big bands, or something like that. But I'll have to look that up.
Look them up and I'll tweet it out.
Because I have that in one of my presentations. I have exactly what those are.
Now, are those bands elastic?
Yeah.
They are elastic.
I mean, they're just like
almost a bungee cord.
No, they're not that soft, but any big oversized band you would find in the weight room, it's that, except it's like 3 times bigger.
And so when kids are coming out of the blocks, their partner's standing, is it attached to their partner as well?
So with the band, they just have it around their hip. I mean, it's literally on them like a hula hoop. They put their partner in the hula hoop, and then they've got I call the partner that's holding strong the anchor. They have to anchor themselves to the ground and I find that it's better to go sideways, you know, and I learned this from a guy named Will Fleming, who owns Force Fitness in Bloomington, Indiana. He was a hammer thrower for Indiana University, and then opened his own gym, and now is in powerlifting and training. And, you know, if you're in the strength world or lifting world, you probably know Will Fleming. But this is where I got it from, working speed camps with him back when I was a high school coach. But they stand perpendicular. They start in a athletic stance and then sink their hips and shift their hips away from their partner. The partner that's sprinting, they get in a good position with some tension already on the band. I set them off on a go, and it's a 3-step start, trying to be as big as they can with correct posture and positions. And once they get out to the end, they walk it back slow. We just repeat it.
That's great. I love that. And I am looking forward. I love the fact that you can put them in a bag.
Yes.
And how that doesn't mean you're a lazy coach. You appreciate that. It just means that you're efficient and you're an essentialist.
Matter of fact, it's actually harder. And here's why it's harder. You have to constantly be aware and still coach every athlete. So don't think for half a second that I'm not constantly coaching the person that's resisting or the person that's being the anchor, because if they screw it up, they screw up their partner. So essentially, especially if I have groups of 5 going or 6 or whatever, I have to be an unbelievable coach with my eyes and my communication to get shit right. Because if it's wrong, we're wasting our time. And I think when most people do this, this is what happens. They try it once and they're like, that was crappy. That was no good. Well, you gotta teach. You gotta teach, and you gotta get them to understand what you want, what you're looking for. But what's nice about like the manual resistance is I can essentially coach the resistance. I can go heavier resistance at some points of the year and lighter resistance at other points of the year, and then just have no resistance.
Now, you say you actually coach the anchor more than you do the person.
Well, not more, but I have to coach them.
You have to coach them. Now, what are their cues? What are the things you tell them?
So on the resistance stuff, on any resisted start, those guys know that in the set position, I'm going to give hard resistance. And that's the hardest moment. And the reason is because if they are in, we're talking about those knee angles, right? If their knee angles in the set position are too small, they'll start to collapse. So it teaches them to get in those bigger angles in their knees and essentially kind of in their hips as well, so that when they get tension pulled, they can stay strong. They get used to bigger open angles. So anyway, on set, there's hard resistance. On go, the first 2 to 3 steps, their resistance, obviously they have to let them move. And I'm coaching the athlete that's sprinting to stay big, no matter how long it takes you to finish the step. But once they get through those first 2 steps, the entire time, the resistor is letting off a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And the reason I do it like that is because that's essentially what's happening in a block start. In a block start, as you progress through your drive steps, it's taking less and less force to do what you're doing. So I like that piece that I can have my resistor, I'm going to call him, my resisting athlete, let off and let off and let off through the entire whatever, 15 meters, 20 meters, 30 meters, whatever I'm doing.
So it's almost like the resistor is accelerating along with the accelerator?
Yeah, so at the beginning, it's not going to look like they're running, but by the end of that drill, they're literally going to they're holding on and they're running with them. And a lot of their resistance actually comes from a little bit of just like literal like arm bend and pull like this, but they're literally running with the athlete by the end.
I thought your medicine ball stuff was super simple. It's like, you can watch a course on medicine ball training and get 500 different things,
exercises. Yeah.
And you're like, once again, your brain is cluttered and you don't know. Okay. But you could almost say that for a high school kid, you could have 10, 12, 14, maybe some 16-pound balls and do one type of throw.
Correct. Yeah. And I
Maybe
think,
maybe throw it high and maybe throw it far or both.
yes,
But
exactly.
but you just finish the damn throw,
That's
and you do 3 sets of 8 or 3 sets of 10. There's no
Mhm.
magic in sets and reps, so it's
Correct.
whatever the hell you want to do,
hmm
and that can kind of be enough.
Yes. Simplify. Yeah. I think,
Simplify.
and here's the thing that I think is a really good key to any coach. And it doesn't matter if you're old, in the middle, or brand new to it. You have to take in all this information and you have to filter it, because there's lots of good information. You have to filter it and take the stuff that makes sense to you and it fits in line with the things that you do. And that's all you use. Even if something is really good, but it doesn't really fit in line with what you do, or it doesn't really make sense to you, don't do it. And that's what I think I've done a good job of over the years. Is I've seen a lot of really good people speak. I've had some fantastic courses, but I'm only going to include pieces that make sense and where I can connect the dots in training and with my athletes. If they're going to ask me, Coach, why are we doing this? And I don't have a good reason, we're wasting our time.
That kind of segues into a kind of a non-track question I was going to ask you. Um, uh, if you could name an important mentor to you or for you. I know that I was just telling a 22-year-old assistant of mine today that about him needing to latch on to some people, and how back in the 80s and 90s when I was a track coach, I didn't have anyone. And it wasn't until the internet of like the late 90s that I got attached to a guy named Paul Souza, who was a great coach at Wheaton College in Massachusetts. And I think we emailed back and forth every day. And I'd already won 2 state championships, so I could make the case I didn't need a mentor when I'm 40 years old. But he was, and he took me down that road. And then after you answer that, tell us somebody that nobody knows that we should be following.
Okay. Well, this is always an awkward question for me, Coach, because I'm going to give you a couple names, but nobody's probably going to know about them unless they're Indiana people. But I didn't come through the coaching world with any mentorship in any constant connection with anyone. I have always been a person that wants to be successful, and I hate losing. And I hate losing a lot. And I'm not even a good loser. So I did anything I could to learn in my first 10 years. And then and I still kept learning, by the way. I mean, I have certificates on my wall right now from more recent things than that. But I was very addicted to learning anything that I could from whoever I could. I didn't care if you were famous or not famous, from a little school, big school, high school, college. I didn't care. But the 2 people that really did have some influence on me, even during that time, was a guy named Tim Ritchie, who's in Indianapolis, Indiana, who's a phenomenal high school coach. He coached a little bit at the University of Indianapolis, but his attention to detail and his willingness to share information with me, some of it was his own, but some of it was stuff he just picked up over the years as well. That's one person. The other person's name is Mike Holman, and he was a high school coach at the time, and now he's at Marion College in Indiana. But he's also a phenomenal coach, and he was always willing to share information. And I went to any clinic I could of his for years, because he tended to lay stuff out there that was science-based, but simple enough for me to be able to take it back and do something with it. So really, those are the only 2 names. I don't have any name that's going to shock anybody. And I'll give you a name of somebody that I think you have to watch out for. And I don't even know this guy very well. It's just that we ended up coaching against each other, and I follow him, and I keep seeing him really progress athletes. What I'm known for is progressing athletes a lot. Like I'm not known for any superstar or anything like that. Most people know me because somebody was this good, but now they're like this good. And this guy tends to do the same thing. His name is Maury Turner. and he's now at, I think he just got a job at Alabama State. But that's a guy that I'm excited to follow, because he's obviously doing a lot of things right, because he's making average people really good, and he's making good people great.
It's kind of like what I say about the people always want to know, football coaches that want to know what they're doing at Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
And I say it's a reality TV show there. It's a rigged game. They have out of the last 4 drafts, they have like 60 guys in the NFL. Mm-hmm. Every single guy that goes there probably should be in the NFL when they mm-hmm. graduate.
Yeah.
So I want to know, I don't care what Saban's doing. I want to know what they're doing at Coastal Carolina and mm-hmm. Appalachian State. I want to see the guys that they're recruiting nobodies.
Yeah.
And have the capability of upsetting a top 20 team.
Correct.
So,
right.
Yeah, I love that. Let's transition. I think I first knew of you when I saw a presentation you did about the 400. And obviously we latch on to people that, that think like we do,
Yeah, true.
Like that great minds think alike and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so people think I'm really harsh on Clyde Hart. And I was going to read this to you, and I think you'll probably agree, but if you don't agree, but Clyde Hart said this. He said the main reason we're seeing more of the sprinter type succeed in the 400 meters is largely due to the fact that we're able to develop stamina and endurance more effectively than we can increase the sprinting abilities of a middle distance runner.
Okay.
So do you believe it's easier to take a sprinter and make him a 400 guy than it is to take a distance runner and make him into a 400 guy?
Oh, I think it's definitely easier, because speed is the absolute #1 factor to being fast. It's very difficult to take a slow person and make them fast. It takes time. It takes years, but I believe that sprinting is a skill. It can be taught, and it can be taught, and it can be developed. In terms of what's harder and what he's saying, I don't really know. But yeah, I mean, making fast people last longer, to me, that's
it.
That's it.
That's just it.
That's the name of the game for me.
I think I quoted you, and I absolutely love this. The 30-meter fly is the #1 indicator of potential in the 100 meters to the 800 meters.
Yes, right.
And for some reason, there's a lot of coaches that want to be contrarians about that.
Yes.
I don't understand why.
Now, and I don't even remember. So that's one of those pieces that I picked up at a clinic. So I couldn't even tell you who said that. I don't, but this is what I know. It was referenced, and it was science. So it stuck with me, and it always has. And so I've always dedicated myself to making every one of my people faster, and then making that speed last longer. And we can do that with the #1 way to do that is to work on speed, to work on technique, and we work on efficiency. We work on all these things. And we have the weight room as well, to work on the power input part. And I think part of the weight room is we literally do get physically stronger, but that also makes us more durable. Not only are our muscles stronger, our tendons get stronger, our muscular skeletal system in general gets stronger. So we become more durable and more explosive. But yeah, we do that and we just keep going, something good is going to happen.
I was listening to your podcast that you did with JT Ayers.
Yeah, okay.
Who's a very good friend of mine. I think he called me 3 years ago out of the blue, never heard of him. And I think we talked for 4 hours.
Wow.
And, one of those deals,
He seemed like one of those guys. Yeah. Easy to talk to.
I think he drinks too much coffee. He's just a really excited guy all the time. And whenever I start talking track, it's like I've had too much coffee too, like right now. But I loved your saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but basically the potential of a 400 guy can be traced back to his PR in the 200.
Yes.
And then of course the potential, and I'll add this, the potential of a 200-meter guy can be traced back to his absolute speed, like 30-meter fly.
Correct.
So that's why it builds forward. But
Yes.
but I love what you said. I've never heard it said so precisely, that if you have a kid that runs a 22 PR in the 200, you want him at 23 at the 200 mark in the 400, and then you want him about 1.5 or 2 seconds. You want to be 23.5 or 24 in the second half of the race.
So no, that's not, it's a little bit off. So if they're a 22 flat open 200 kid,
yes,
I want them to be within a half second to a full second of that during the 200. Okay, so they need that athlete, if they're going to reach their full potential, has to go out in 22.5 to 23 flat.
gotcha.
So that's the first piece. And then in the second 200, they have to be within a 2 to 3 second range of what they just went out in.
2 to
whatever
3
that
seconds.
was. Now, men
of what they just went out in.
what they just went out in.
So let's say the 22 guy went out in 23.
Even.
23-0.
Mm-hmm.
So you want him to be in what range for the second half of that race?
So if he can be perfect, he's going to be able to come back in the 25.
So a 22 guy should be running a 48 in the 400.
He has the potential to. Mm-hmm.
Potential to.
Yep.
And you could probably also speak to the fact that if you can't break 23 in the 200, it's really hard to run a 48.
Yeah, it's like just not going to happen.
Just not going to happen.
And I'm going to add this because I think it's important since this is being brought up. Guys, in my experience, and in most historic cases, if you really look at times, most guys can make it within about a 2 second range, 2 to 2.5. And a lot of the ladies, though, are more in the 2.5 to 3 second range. But my thing is, we need to be in that range. If we're not in that range, like either we're not training hard enough, we're not training right, or just bottom line is you're not being tough enough in the last 200.
Well, you can definitely, by having those numbers, you can definitely diagnose or
correct.
You can say, okay, you went out and ran the first half well, but the second half, no. So we have some things we can do about that.
Yes.
Now, if you're a 22 guy and go out at 23.5, you need to just get that guy to run faster. He's just leaving too much on the table, right?
Correct. Yeah. And I always have the person in a clinic or a talk that's like, well, I have a guy that runs 23 flat, but he ran 47.9. I'm like, well, then how often does he run the 200? Well, he's only run it once. And like, well,
he's probably
that doesn't work.
Exactly.
He's not really a 23 point guy then. Like, come on. Or we always have, I always have the person that maybe their guy never runs. He hasn't run the 200 since, his sophomore year, and now he's a senior, and he's running a really good time, and he almost even splits in the 400, and they're like, my guy just doesn't run that way. But he still goes out. I mean, he goes out and, what you're saying, based on his 200 PR, he comes back at about the same. Well, I'm like, well, that's not possible. Or he's not reaching his full potential, not even close, because he got to be going out fast enough to be able to be in enough fatigue state. I don't care how good your training is, and be in a fatigue state enough where he actually gets slower.
Sure.
That just should happen. Just all you got to do is pull up the world records. It's not hard. The fastest times in history, none of those were even splits or positive splits and all the bullshit that gets talked about sometimes.
Okay, let's go right to it then. I absolutely love this from your presentation. Not your TFC, but the one I saw about the 400.
Yeah, the 400 one.
Van Niekerk compared to Michael Johnson. I think
Yeah.
this is so powerful that Niekirk went 20.50 to the top, to the 200, and Johnson only went 21.32.
Yeah. And in the presentation, it's even broken down by hundreds.
Yes.
Which I think is even more mind blowing because of the last 100.
Oh, and I have that written down.
Yeah.
Van Niekirk died.
Mm-hmm.
Died. He was just, I mean, we make fun of people that die like this, but he ran 12.05 in the final 100
versus Johnson's
11.52.
11.5. He was a half second slower in the finish, yet he ran the fastest time ever. And so the thing that I always say is, so when did Van Niekirk break the world record really? Or when did he beat Michael Johnson in the first 200?
That's right.
Because he got his ass kicked in the last 200, if you compare those two times. And it's the same with the women. In that same presentation, I show the world record holder, the world champion that year, and the world champion runner-up, or the world championships runner-up. The fastest finisher of that race, or the fastest finisher of those three, is the person that was the world championships runner-up. So the slowest person of those group of three women finished the fastest. And the next person that was a little bit slower than her in the last 100 is the woman that beat her. And keep in mind that in the race, Shawnee Weibo was closing on her, couldn't catch her, but that woman finished slower, still beat her. Her time is faster. And then the world record holder finished much slower than either one of them, but she's the fastest to ever run it, and she beat both of them to the 200, and that's
by like a full second, right?
Yeah, it wasn't even close.
It's just crazy.
Yeah.
So I mean, I just love the way you bring out those numbers, and it really just comes back. I've had so many times, I've been around track all my life, and I have seen dozens of situations where a sprinter is thrown into the 4x4, and he runs the fastest split. He doesn't know if he can complete the lap.
Correct.
But you put him at anchor, you let him compete, and they'll go out and they will shock you because they're fast.
They're fast. Mm-hmm. Fast wins, especially if you have competitive spirit, refuse to lose. If you have that in you, you're going to figure out how to finish, you know. And with that being said, I think we've all done this at some point, because even I'm guilty of it early in my career. We put one of those kids in, and we're like, oh my God, they're a 400 runner. And then all of a sudden you start changing their training, you volume load them. And one, they hate track now.
Amen.
Two, they're worn out. And you just kind of kill it. And it's not it.
Yeah,
it's not it.
I call that taking the cat out of the runner. Mm-hmm. You know, these guys, and you talk about being competitive. And one of the things I say about the true cats of the world is that they seem lazy to try hard coaches. You know, like, I mean, most coaches came from a grinder. I outworked people. Mm-hmm. I was not as talented, but somehow I got really good. And that's the way we coach. But those supposedly lazy cats, they are just absolutely competitive, Zell. Mm-hmm. They will kill to win. And they don't sleep if they don't perform well. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes you have to just understand the nature of those fast twitch athletes.
Yeah. And I think too, it goes back to how I coach. They need to understand everything we're doing. So if they're going to slide into my 4x4 or become a 400 runner, I'm going to be able to show them why we're doing everything that we're doing. So none of it just becomes running and none of it becomes pointless. Yeah. And, you know, I've been criticized before as a coach to be more of a track teacher than a track coach. That's fine by me. If my people know what we're doing, why we're doing it, they're more likely to buy into it.
Sure.
And when they buy into it, it's game over. They're going to improve more than your guy or your girl. You know, when you're bringing all this up, one of the coolest moments of my entire career, last year I had a guy named Channing Phillips win the D2 national title in the 400. And an issue we've had in his whole career is him going out hard enough. And some of it's fear, some of it is that he went out a couple times too hard and died. And I know he's a finisher, which I'm totally cool with. But if you don't get to 200 fast enough, you're still not going to reach your potential. And he would tend to get stuck at 47.1 to 47.4. And you get frustrated. Like, all we had to do is look at your 200 time. It's still 23 point blah, blah, blah. Well, he's a 21.2 open 200 guy, hands down. Even after some injuries and some struggles and surgery and all this stuff, we still got him to 21.2. So according to what I've just, talked about in that video and talking to you, he has to at least go out at 22.2 to reach his full potential. And we started getting closer, and he was edging. He makes the national meet. We get there. He runs the second fastest time in qualifying. So now he's the number 2 ranked dog in the finals at the national D2 meet. And then in the finals, he's coming around the curve, and I can tell he's running pretty well, but guys are starting to pull away from him. And I'm standing near the 200 with my assistant coach. And we're going. I said, Coach, before the race, I said, Coach, get a clock on this because I want to know exactly what his 200 split is. So they're going, and Coach goes, he's in trouble. And I'm like, just wait. And I said, make sure you get the time. He clicks it, 22.22. So literally in that moment, I go, he's fine. He just won. Because I already know what the boy's going to do in the last 150. I needed him to get to where he needed to be at 200. So from that moment on, he just kept picking up. And my specific instruction to him was, you need to win by 350 and it's over. And right at about 350, he took the lead and he just kept going. And he went from 47.1 to that day going 46.41 and won the D2 national title. He didn't win it though in the finish. And that's what it looked like, by the way. It looked like he won in the finish, but he won in the first 200 because he finally ran at his potential.
Oh, it gives me chills, Coach.
Oh, it's the video of it and him sprinting to the team and diving into him. It's just very cool.
Well, do you have to get anywhere in the next 10 minutes? Can I ask you a couple more questions?
Yeah, you can ask. Yeah.
Okay. I have to talk to you a little bit about hurdles. My son, Alec, coached the best hurdler in the history of Illinois, high school hurdler, 13.59. And Alec is huge on if you get really good at the first 2 hurdles in the highs, that solves about 95% of your hurdle problems.
Yeah, that helps a lot.
One of the things that he talks about is if you're having trouble at the first hurdle, the problem is probably back in the blocks.
Okay.
That if you have trouble at the second hurdle, the problem is probably back at the first hurdle. So can you speak to technical excellence going over those first 2 hurdles and why it's so important to practice that fresh?
Well, I think one of the things I've always struggled with, and I have since I was honestly a kid, is that people really do go and totally coach the hurdle start differently than a sprint start. Like, it's way different. And I would totally disagree. And I always use the example because I have a good video of it, but I always use the example of Sally Pearson. Sally Pearson was a phenomenal sprinter and hurdler from Australia. And I have a video of her all the way through her drive phase, through takeoff of hurdle 1. And pretty much when her foot strikes the ground for takeoff, the forward angle, her shin angle is already forward. Her foot is flexed and dorsiflex. She strikes the ground, she pushes off into the hurdle. And we always hear this whole thing about, well, it's not the same as the sprints because you've got to get up for the hurdles. Yeah, that's true. But no one means stand the hell up and stare at the hurdle and run at it. So for me, Trevor Bassett's a 13.59 collegiate hurdler. And then I have some, I've had 14.0 guys and 14.1 and 14.2. Trevor Bassett was a 7-stepper. Travis Moore, another guy, is an 8-stepper. So there's some difference there. And then, of course, women as well mixed in. But the shin angles and the drive stuff and the patient pushes and all that are the same. For a 8-stepper that tends to get too close to the hurdles, I may have to make some cue adjustments to make sure they don't get too close to the hurdle. You don't really deal with that much in high school, in my opinion, or at least I didn't. And I had my best was a 14.32 female and a 14.2 male. We never really had to deal with like, oh, they're way too close. So that was newer for college and me. But the principles all stay the same. And then that last step, literally, the sooner you can get that shin angle forward to push into the hurdle, the better. So if I can strike straight down, I can get into the hurdle really well. But if I can strike with my shin angle slightly forward, I can immediately push into the hurdle. But any reach out where the foot's out here and the shin angle is kind of pointing towards the hurdle, I'm not in a good position. So, I think that's hard for me to explain without having all my visuals, but I think that's one of the things that always bothers me. And now the whole time, by the way, when you are in a drive phase and you are angled and you are gradually coming up, if you don't do a good job with your upper body of getting it to go forward and staying down, you're just going to go up. Once you leave the ground, now all of a sudden we're just flying. So in terms of what your son says, I do believe that there has to be a good drive phase and start all the way to the hurdle, all the way through takeoff. And then you got to do a good job over top of the hurdle to get back to the ground, get your trail leg to the front and attack into the next. But that's that piece. I would also probably agree with like if hurdle 2 is bad, it normally does relate to 1, especially if we're going to say hurdle 1 was pretty good. Without question, something went wrong, either over the hurdle or as soon as we went to touchdown.
And I think getting to the thing about being fresh, I've heard of hurdlers working on hurdles after a grueling 400 workout.
Yeah.
Things like that, or hurdling without spikes, or hurdling without blocks, and the thought that you can do that type of skill work that is probably the most aggressive thing in all sports, in my opinion, hurdling, to do that when you're not at the peak of freshness, is just really not serving the athlete well.
Yeah, and to me, again, that like if I'm going to do anything that has to do with true speed and power, we're going to do that after a warm-up when we're fresh. Now, I will tell you this, though. I'm not going to say I never touch on speed mechanics or power output after fatigued, but it's to force them to make their body move like it's supposed to move, even though they're fatigued.
Sure.
But I'm not trying to make them faster, or I'm not trying to, it's not a training movement, or it's not a training moment to essentially make them faster in the 30 fly.
Sure. Just like when I say that when we do our lactate workouts, we are not getting faster that day.
Yeah. Right.
That we're not getting, and I think too many coaches think that all running gets you faster.
Correct.
And it truly does not. But we are accomplishing something we have to do because we have to be able to sprint further. So we can't,
right. We have to be able to deal with that.
Absolutely.
And I think that this is important too. And it was this is not my phrase. This was someone else's phrase. Sometimes the reason we work out is just so that we can work out more. And sometimes I think you have to pay attention to it. You have to start working out in a way, in in a capacity that you don't really like, so that you can work out more better to actually work on what you want. And again, I think I don't think that's as relevant in high school, unless you're coaching track year round. But at the collegiate level, that's damn true. Like, there's some times in conditioning where the only reason we're doing what we're doing is so that we can work out more later for exactly what we're doing. But I'm not a person who's, 20 times 300 meters. I'm not a guy that's going to run 200-meter hills. Just not that person.
Well, this has been absolutely fantastic. And we do have some participants here. And if maybe a couple quick questions, we've already gone 66 minutes.
Okay.
So maybe open it up for maybe 5 minutes. If you have a question, you can put it into chat. And if we don't see any chat questions coming up, then we will just end it here. So let's give everybody a minute here, and I'll look for something as we're waiting for questions. In the weight room, give me one favorite and one pet peeve.
Well,
like what do you like in the weight room? Is there anything that you see in the weight room or hear about in the weight room that you think, damn, I just don't like that?
Well, it's the reason I hesitate on that question is this. I coach in the weight room like I coach on the track, and that is, it needs to have purpose, and it needs to be like, I need to coach them to be technical at what they're doing. So my favorite thing is to do explosive things that I can relate to. I can relate to the movements or how that gain is going to help them on the track. So, and I feel like everybody says kind of the same thing on these types of things, but it's something as simple as power cleans. But I don't like power cleans unless you're going to coach it and do it right. So that's my biggest pet peeve, is when people do anything in the coaching world and they say, oh, yeah, we do that. Well, yeah, but you do it like shit. You do it just to say, yeah, I do that. It doesn't do anybody any good to do something and do it totally wrong or do it without purpose. And some people do exercises with their athletes different than I do. If they have a purpose and they explain it to me, I'm cool. I get it. But if you're just doing it and you don't have purpose and you're not relating it to what they do on the track, it's a total waste of time.
I thought that you would, one of the things that I really got from your presentation is the whole idea of finishing through the glute, whether it's in acceleration or in the weight room, that you like to see things where the hips finish and the hip and the glutes fire. Yeah. So, and that's one thing that I sure took away from your presentation.
Yeah, I've learned to really emphasize that more. And not only do you end up building strength in your glutes, which is that final fire, if you get them to, again, start correctly, because, building strength there does you no good if you don't finish it on the track. But the thing that I've noticed in the last few years is what it also does is as their glutes fire and they get to straight, it also creates flexibility in their hip flexors and high quads, which sometimes are just tight there. So, and I've noticed that a lot more in the elite level athletes in college. I didn't really notice this at the high school level. But if you can constantly get them to get more glute contraction and all of a sudden their hips move a little bit more, they start to get some extension in their hip flexors maybe that they never had, and that's going to pay off in their stride length in time.
So what you're saying is there's a reciprocal value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The glutes firing, that it creates more extension of
that's right. Exactly.
Very cool.
Yeah. And you find some of your weaker athletes already have that extension, but they're weak as hell. And then there's some athletes you have that are enormously strong, but they don't have that extension. So both of those athletes need improved. The explosive fast athlete that doesn't get full extension is also not reaching their full potential. So that's a place where you can help them. And it's so obvious in simple things like glute bridges. But again, people say, well, I do that. Yeah, but you don't coach it. That guy over there is three inches lower than he should be. So he's not even contracting the glute in his state, and he's not reaching the muscle fibers that he needs to for him to get better. He's just going to stay the same because you're not getting him to squeeze a little bit harder and get up a little bit more, and you're not doing any sort of other movements to help create a little bit more flexibility in his front side.
I love it. Well, Ernie, thank you so much for going a little bit over here. And
Sure.
For the participants that saw this live, I have a feeling like you probably thought it was a pretty good podcast. And if you thought so, put something out there that I can retweet from you. And I would sure like to get as many people who attend TFC to see this recording or listen to it in the car or whatever. I know I had a great time. Thank you so much.
Man. Thank you, guys.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tony.